you're happy to be alive, just put a hand in the air. Glad that everybody has a hand in the air. I would have been worried. My name is Baxter Wordsworth. This is the poet. Sometimes I feel like I'm Andre 3000. When I come around, son, ask where's my album. Some say took a vow of silence like devout monks. Some bang on my old sounds like some loud drums. Wow. Proud to announce new music coming out, starting from the bottom, building from the ground up. Yo, yelling cowabunga when I crowd surf. No, before I crowd run, I'd rather couch surf from the underground dirt. Sowing seeds, growing stems, leaves through the semen of your town church. Worship the pen that scribbles a blissful hymn. Great universal verses, my girl was a crystal gem. Kiss amber, smoke amethyst rock, some hot like lit candle wicks mixed with sick cancer sticks. Rain, sleet, inhale, exhale, chemtrails posted on the corner, moving letters like Excel. Put your hands up high if you feel the vibe. This is the poet will be televised. It's all honest, I ain't telling no lies. Welcome, the poet will be televised. That's right, oh good, you're feeling alive. This is the poet will be televised. This is the poet will be televised, 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 televised. Make sure you sag the list if you want to rock. If you had a bad feeling, well, it's bound to dissolve. Me, I just found profound new resolve. That's right, I be down for the cause. Can you please give this band a freaking round of applause? They dope as shit though. Switch it out like a schizo. They was like, yo, Baxter, you know you gon' rock it from the top, from the get-go. I was like, yeah, let your mama and the kids know. They was like, he jumping like he skip rope. And it's just getting.
All right, so that was our theme song. Welcome everyone to The Poet Will Be Televised. I am your host. This is not The Poet Will Be Televised. Not really. This is The Poet Podcast with Dale Novella on Sky's Crescent Radio. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Today we'll be talking about sexuality. I wanted to sing that, but I was thinking about Sensitivity, that song. Sensitivity. A man like me, that song. But there's no song that says you need a man with sexuality. There's no song that says that. Not in that way, not yet. Anywho, let's get into our wonderful panel today. I will start with my esteemed co-host on many fronts, including The Poet Will Be Televised, Mr. Baxter Wordsworth. Baxter Wordsworth is an MC and host of End of the Week, the longest running weekly hip hop open mic in New York City, and The Poet Will Be Televised, of course, jam session for poets and the poetic. Thank you so much for being here, Baxter. How are you doing today?
Doing well. It's a lovely rainy Sunday in New York City, and I got no complaints.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I have no complaints about that. All right, so let's get into our special guest, Miss Kristen Kennedy. I'm super excited about having her because she's just a wonderful person in general, and she makes really great biscuits. But on the professional front, Kristen Kennedy is a sexuality educator based in New York City. She currently works with college students addressing sexual and intimate partner violence. She provides programming and outreach that seeks to examine the root causes of violence, build bystander intervention skills, identify aspects of healthy and unhealthy relationships, and encourage active consent and communication. Additionally, she's deeply committed to working with medical professionals to develop best practices for creating more positive sexual health outcomes with their patients. Specifically, she is focused on how medical professionals address sexual health disparities within adolescent and young adult populations. Kristen has expertise in one-on-one sexual health consulting, sexual and relationship communication skills building, active consent training, bystander intervention training, and sexual product material safety. Kristen has her master's in human sexuality education from Widener University. Thank you so much for being here, Kristen. How are you doing today?
Thanks, Dale. I'm really excited to be here with y'all, and it's also really weird to hear your bio read out loud, but thanks so much.
Well, it's a beautifully written bio. I don't know if you wrote it yourself or you had someone else write it, but it's beautiful. And my partner in life, Mr. Mikal Amin, aka Mikal Amin Lee, is a master of the craft, a 20-year veteran of New York City's independent hip hop movement. He has toured 13 countries over 10 years as an artist, educator, and ambassador. He is a published essayist and scholar, and is also the co-curator and producer of Brooklyn Academy of Music's hip hop showcase Word, Sound, Power. How are you doing today, Mikal Amin?
I'm doing okay considering the rain and lack of sun, but I'm hanging in there.
Vitamin D is coming.
There you go.
In the summer.
Yes.
In like 2 months. But it's coming. We know it's there.
Yes. So before you continue.
Oh.
Before you continue.
Am I forgetting something? Myself?
I'm forgetting. Yes, you are. Reared in the South Carolina Low Country, Dale Novella is a singer-songwriter, poet, and educator who performs and produces events in the New York City area. A captivating performer, Novella has graced various stages in both the U.S. and Europe, including the Bitter End, the Bowery Poetry Club, and is a regular at So Far Sounds. Novella also uses her love of music to educate youth in social justice and the arts. Dale Novella is heavily influenced by soul singers like Otis Redding, old school Motown, and 90s R&B rock. She's christened herself the Neutron Angel after hearing an ethereal R&B tune on the Outkast Ottawa soundtrack entitled Neutron Angel and performed by Wild Peach. Novella began the Wreck Life Royalty Entertainment Company in 2011 to produce and promote music that inspires and uplifts. The re-christened Dale Novella Presents flagship event is The Poet will be televised at Harlem Sylvana, a poetry jam session that fuses Novella's great loves, good music, and soul-wrenching poetry, as well as the host and producer of the Poets Podcast, which we're on today. How are you doing, Miss Novella?
I'm good. I am hoping that everyone sees the beautiful lighting behind me. But I'm doing really well. I hope I'm looking forward to getting to this conversation. First of all, I'm looking forward to this conversation, and also to sleeping really well tonight because I'm drinking wine right now. So good sleep.
Got it.
So thank you for that introduction, Mikal, and let's get into our next video. This is, do I remember it off the top of my head? No, I don't, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be awesome.
Yeah. So, who's got a lover in the house? I love me too. My right now lover is down the block at work, so I'm gonna just sing it to him. Yeah,
Well then.
Don't tell my brother that though, because he'll find him and try to kill him. So. Yeah. He's angry when it comes to men and me. This song is called Next to Me. So like I said, you can get your body roll on if you feel it. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. It's so amazing how you make me feel. Your touch, your kiss, your laugh. It's all so real. I love the way you make me smile. It's from your eyes, they make my heart go. They make my heart go wild. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. There's a mystery in your eyes, a quiet confidence you're unable to hide. You say you're broken, but you're strong. That's why I had to write it in this song. 'Cause come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak. Each time I tell you it's time to go, I realize more and more to know that a minute without you is lonely. That my touch is meant for you only. I can't describe the feeling in words. Well, I guess I'm trying, but your love deserves the highest attention to detail and action. That's why I love you with all this passion. Each time I tell you it's time to go, I realize more and more to know. Without you is lonely. That my touch is meant for you only. I can't describe the feeling in words. Well, I guess I'm trying, but your love deserves the highest attention to detail and action. That's why I love you with all the passion. Each time I tell you it's time to go, I realize more and more to know that a minute without you is lonely. That my touch is meant for you only. I can't describe this feeling in words. Well, I guess I'm trying, but your love deserves the highest attention to detail and action. I love you. Come lay. That's where I know your touch will make me weak, but bring your body right next to me. Come lay right next to me. That's where your body's supposed to be. I know your touch will make me weak. So enough with this love shit. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
All right, that was Jeanette Berry with Next to Me. And in that song, she's discussing having a very passionate relationship. We assume both like mentally and physically with a partner. And so my first question is, what is the relationship between sexual intimacy and non-sexual intimacy in your own opinion? I see Kristen's already unmuted and she's the expert. So what do you say?
I don't know if I'm the expert, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of connections between sexual and non-sexual intimacy, right? And there's a lot of connections between what we consider as intimacy. Intimacy can mean a lot of different things, right? Just as sex can mean a lot of different things, and we can share it with a lot of different people. I think being able to build intimacy with people is a really important facet of our human experience. And we need to be able to build intimacy with people, right? When we're thinking about closeness and understanding and friendship and physical touch. So that we can get those things met by a whole bunch of people, not just our partners, right? So we're not relying on just one person. So I think sexual intimacy and non-sexual intimacy are connected in ways that we don't always necessarily see on the surface, right? Like intimacy is intimacy. Some people see sexuality as intimate, some people don't. Some people see closeness as intimate, some people don't. So I think that, sexual intimacy allows you to deepen a relationship with somebody, and non-sexual intimacy allows you to deepen your relationship with somebody. And it's important to, have intimacy with a lot of different people, not just your sexual partner.
Word. And yes, I'm sorry, you with the master's degree, you're the expert. Sorry. There's literally letters for you. I guess I totally agree with everything Kristen's saying. It's interesting the way I read the question. I would just add for myself, I look at that and say, sexual intimacy is something that I believe you need non-sexual intimacy really to kind of make it intimate, whereas the reverse is not true. So you can completely have a intimacy with someone that doesn't have anything sexual. It's basically what you said, Kristen, but that really kind of struck for me, because I think oftentimes there is sort of this conflation that intimacy means physical and it means sexual. And yeah, you very eloquently put it. It definitely does not. And I think that's something in particular, I think when working with young people, I notice, working primarily with high school students, that's one of the sort of developmental things that I realize that I've witnessed, obviously having been a teen after the fact, coming through a lot of mistakes that I'm probably still making to some degree in figuring all of that out. But obviously in the moment of being a teen, you're not really understanding all of that. So I see that kind of firsthand, sort of learning about what that means.
Cool.
Can you just say the question one more time?
What is the relationship between sexual intimacy and non-sexual intimacy?
Okay, yeah. I think intimacy is intimacy, right? Like, when you ask what the relationship is, I think they're both facets of the concept of intimacy. Like, they're both under the same umbrella. And I think, like, it could be, I don't want to say just my opinion, but like, intimacy is, synonymous with closeness and more to the point, like knowing, like, to be intimate with someone is to get to know them or to allow them to know you, and I think it's also like how honest you are with people's probes of you. Like, when people want to get to know you, how vulnerable and honest are you about that? So it's like sexual intimacy, like me, like I think they can be separate, sexual intimacy and personal intimacy. Like, you can allow somebody to get to know you sexually. You can be honest with somebody sexually and not necessarily be honest with them or allow them to get to know you personally. The vice versa is true. You can be honest with somebody personally and honest with somebody and vulnerable with somebody personally and not let, that's more common to not to let them get to know you sexually, I think, relationships, the reason why relationships are beautiful, because it's a merger of those two things oftentimes. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be, but like when you love someone completely, you're being intimate with them on multiple levels. As a society, we tend to, like, I don't want to say value the sexual intimacy more, but we put more of a what's an appropriate word? There's like it's heavier on the scales, right? Like,
it's a priority.
But when I say it's heavier on the scales, like, not even that it's a priority. It's like, if you are in a relationship and you found out that your partner was intimate with somebody on a very deep emotional level, that's almost easier to forgive than if they were superficially intimate with somebody sexually, right? If they're like, oh, it literally was just a fling, it just happened. But that's oftentimes like a unforgivable violation of a relationship, more than if somebody, like, if somebody established a whole, like, if it's almost easier to forgive somebody falling in love with somebody else than it is to forgive them sleeping with someone else, which is like an interesting way that intimacy is looked at in our culture. But yeah,
I agree with you about, like, usually you do hear about people not being able to forgive sexual intimacy with another partner if that's the barriers in your relationship, that there is no sexual activity outside the relationship.
Yeah.
For me personally, I would be mad as hell. I could never forget that. If I found out Mikal was going in the bathroom or into another room at night to talk to some other woman.
Right, but what would be easier to even attempt to forgive, right? Like, if you found out that he had fallen in love with someone else, or if you found out that he, like, drunkenly slept with some stranger.
I would forgive him for drunkenly cheating on me.
Really?
Yeah, I would forgive Mikal. But, like, a whole nother relationship.
Mikal's like, I don't like this conversation at all.
That's like me and my husband. I know he's very sensitive. So if Mikal has a deep relationship with another person and feels like he is in love with another person, like, that's a huge deal. Like, because I know Mikal,
That makes sense.
So it also, like, that depends on the relationship and the two people that we're talking about.
And context is always paramount.
I would be different. All of it. I don't.
Macau was like,
For,
don't step over the line at all. On the
I
east side
mean,
of the
Don't do
well,
it.
which is funny. I was like, I was looking at this today, and I was like, okay, so we're the only couple. This is going to be all right. So like, I had to get into an intimate space. I'm like, okay, today's going to be the day that I might have to be vulnerable. I mean, I have personally experienced in my past like that type of transgression, that literally broke me for years. So yeah, for me, it's the physical, it's the non-physical. But I think it also goes back to what you were saying, Baxter, that I wanted to touch on this idea of like, there are loving relationships between partners that is asexual. Like this
No,
is
yeah,
one of the things that is kind
definitely.
of coming into the fore now, in modern times, where there are literally people that have, even to a certain degree, a level of physical touch still, but the what we understand as a sexual act is
Yeah,
not something that
it's
they're
not a part of their
interested.
relationship.
Right. But they're no less affectionate or loving or committed to a person. It just doesn't result in what kind of society is told as well. The highest form of intimacy we're kind of taught, or at least I was taught growing up, was, well, when you really are in love, you
Right.
have sex.
Right.
And that's like the final point of
Frontier.
showing, that's how you really love the person. And then even deeper, as you go into marriage, that institution, like what consummates the marriage, is kind of even within the sort of
Right. But
the
marriage itself, I mean, as we all know, marriage itself, like the roots of marriage is very possessive and sort of not based on love at all.
oh, for
But
sure, it's a transaction.
yeah.
And it doesn't
Yeah, it's a
have to
business
be.
transaction.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
Oh yeah, yeah.
have
And
to be, but-
culturally it's evolved and
Yeah,
changed.
but no, I totally agree.
But
And I
it's-
think, yeah,
But
I think
I
most of
want
us
to add
don't-
something quickly to, because like, but also speaking of like the difference, like the pandemic, if the pandemic has taught us anything, is how important physical and just even social interactions are, and how easy it is, or how like little time it takes to be removed from that before it starts affecting you in like several different ways, which I think people can go way long without sex before like you start losing your shit. Well, some people, who knows? It's different.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think definitely the pandemic brought up this idea of like skin hunger for
Hmm.
folks. And for people, I think, who didn't even conceive of themselves as being somebody who needed to be in physical proximity of somebody else, who needed hugs, who needed physical touch that wasn't even necessarily sexual, like you're saying. Having that removed was such a massive upheaval of the ways in which we feel like we interact with people on a daily basis that we don't even pay attention to, that we don't even realize. And so many folks that I talk to are like, I don't understand why I am feeling strange about my relationships. I don't understand why I'm needing or wanting the things that I want. I'm like, we're in a pandemic. Like, we are literally living in a way that we, in this current time, have never had to live.
Yep.
And we are learning about ourselves a lot of things that we never really realized and knew. So I really appreciate you bringing up that.
Imagine if we would have to go through this before the internet.
Oh God.
It would
Yeah.
have been a disaster. I mean, this is already a disaster. It would have been a bigger disaster.
Well, I guess us specifically, like, because we're used to that amount of connectivity, but like this happened in 100 years ago.
But we don't know socially how many people went crazy. Like, like we know it happened before. And I mean, like, we're used to it. But I mean, like, we all experienced it. Like, you were locked up in your house for 24 hours for how many days straight, and we could hop on Zoom and we could text and still communicate. Take that away and it's solitary confinement. Like, and solitary confinement is already proven, already, like, it'll drive
It'll
you
drive
nuts.
crazy.
Imagine if as a world we would have had that and also, but it's because also the information of the disease wouldn't have spread as quick, and so many more. Anyway, it's a slippery slope, that whole hypothetical train.
Any other words on how sexuality, non-sexual intimacy
See, yeah,
ties in?
I will say this. Me personally, like, I am very compartmentalized when it comes to that. Like, sexual intimacy and non-sexual intimacy is like very like separate, and can sort of like overlap, but does not have to, you know. And uh I don't I think that's a concept that's becoming more popular, but it's still like very jarring to I think most of society, you know, to uh but maybe not, because in the you know in the culture of Tinder and the culture of like hookup culture, I suppose, it's like people I think share themselves sexually with people at a rate that they weren't before. I don't know if that's true. I don't know the
I think we
I
know
think in
about it
modern history,
more.
well, I think in modern history,
mm,
I think there's been ways, right? You talk about the sexual revolution of the '60s.
right.
I think, and that's kind of been. And I'm not an expert either, so like I'm just based on just anecdotal things that
Yeah.
I know.
Right, right,
You
right.
know, I think disease has been the upheaval
Mm,
of those things in periods,
correct.
whether it was when syphilis became a thing in the early parts of the 20th century.
HIV in the 80s.
And right, exactly. So, I mean, I guess I would say, to a degree, I'm in the same boat with Baxter. Like, it's compartmentalized to a degree, but it goes back to what I said originally. I think that in order to have sexual intimacy, I do think you should, or for me, need to have a non-sexual intimacy first. Um, but I don't need sexual intimacy to be intimate with someone. I mean, I consider, kind
Right.
of what Kristen was saying earlier about like the knowing and understanding and the sharing. I have friendships that I feel are extremely intimate with both men and women, because there isn't the idea of intimacy, especially and specifically as I've gotten older, beyond my teen years and maybe my early 20s, it's become, and also to the pandemic, speaking to that, I realize my friendships have actually in the last year mattered more. Um,
Then
I mean,
me?
I've always no, no. See, anyway, no, baby, not you're included in all of that. No, but just in terms of just connecting, I have a weekly chat that I do speaking about the internet with some very old friends of mine. Um, Kristen and Dale know who these people are. Obviously, Ranger and ESP and those guys that I went to college with, and now I've known over 20 some odd years.
Yeah, in high school. You went to high school with Ranger.
Yeah, I went to high school at Ranger, exactly. And so, just us getting up became literally a priority. Whereas, we all are married, families, advancing careers. Now that we're all in our 40s, where there was this kind of a lot of barriers in the way for us to sort of like get super close on a regular basis. I mean,
Or
we
to
built
prioritize it, right? Like
or to prioritize it, but
right.
like it's become like crucial for us to try to get
As
up as many
it should
Thursdays
always
as
be,
possible.
right? Like because
Right.
our social connections are as important as like more important because they're more natural and more than like the financial connections. Like finances are made up, you know, like but we're like us being here is very real.
Yeah.
And same Macau, like, you know, I mean, it's kind of what you saying and what Kristen was saying about like questioning your relationships. Like there were days during this pandemic where I was like sitting here like, do I even have friends? Does everybody hate me? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I don't really enjoy your company at all.
yeah,
That's why I
but I
keep
mean,
having
I
you back
always
on
knew
the
that.
show.
That's the basis of our friendship.
This conversation is going to bring up a lot of stuff this afternoon.
I'm so sorry, Kristen. I should have prepped you for this.
All right.
No, but like, you know, Mikal, our group chat, you know what I'm saying? Like I don't
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
like not even like me engaging in it, but just it being there, just being able to read like the thoughts of my friends and to be part of like some sort of social exchange is some people might say it's like a little comfort, but it's a little comfort with a huge impact, or an impact that's it's so integral that it can be overlooked. You know, it's
Well,
so part of like what you need on a very. It's like drinking water. It's like you know you do it and you kind of might take it for granted. Like, oh, I drink water all the time, but it's like you would die without it. You know.
and to that point, I feel like I've known you for a very long time, and I feel, to get closer to you once I met Dale.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But Vic and Radar in particular, and definitely Vic even more so, because I knew of Radar, but because
I forced them
of
to be friends. He's still low key mad at me about that. But
that,
I was like, y'all have so much to talk about. Y'all should talk.
The point I was trying to make was, yeah, it became, because of the pandemic, there was a deepening of the relationship with all three of you, but I think especially with someone like Vic and Radar, who I know that you already had that type of level of relationship with, that, you know, without getting into all of our stuff, like, we've experienced things together because of the pandemic and just life, that became a source of like comfort and support and things that I would have never expected to kind of share with y'all, because there was a need for that.
So since we've been talking about asexuality and different forms of sexuality or intimacy within partnership, what is there a healthy amount of time to not be sexually intimate with your partner? And if there is, how long is that?
Oh, that was different from the question I read.
It's a little different from the question I sent out, but it's essentially the same. How long is too long to not, like, a break of sexual intimacy with your partner? And is that a thing? Is that just based on different relationships? I think it's based on different relationships.
I was about to, like, I am very skeptical of any sort of like advice or any sort of like parameter that is offered for like all relationships. You know what I'm saying? Like, you should never do this, and it's like, because like I think human beings, our experience on this planet is like drastically different, and we develop drastically different needs. We develop drastically different sort of like desires, and I think in any relationship, it's a constant stream of communicating. So it's like, what does this relationship need? What do these people in this relationship need? So some people with their relationship with sex or with their relationship with each other may need to have some space to not sleep with each other. Some people connect physical intimacy and emotional intimacy different as well, right? So there's some people that if they do sleep with you, they like that invigorates their sort of feeling of their closeness to you emotionally, right? So they might want to, in managing the pace of the relationship, they might want to like not sleep with you, because like, if I sleep with you, I'm going to care about you, and like that's not where I want to go.
Cloud my judgment. You hear that a lot in the rom-com.
Right. But that's, a case by case basis. It's you have to decide in getting to know yourself and getting to know your partner what the rules should be.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I think to Baxter's point around the one rule to like for every relationship, it feels like that's sort of like the Cosmo effect, right? Like every month there's like another Cosmo article that's like, do this, have sex X times with your partner to keep them interested. I'm like, that's not a thing, right? Like that's not a thing. And I think it's another way that we kind of use sex as a weaponized way to keep people feeling insecure about themselves and their relationships. In a lot of ways. And Baxter, I feel like it is exactly right. Like it's different for every partnership and every relationship, and really the piece of that that's necessary is the communication, right? So the folks that are in that relationship communicating like what are their wants and needs and desires at any given time, and those may line up and they may not. And if they line up, great. And if they don't, then how are the folks in that relationship getting what they need at any given time, right? So just like having that conversation of what does our relationship look like right now, and how are we getting what we need, I think is a really important piece of that.
Yeah, I'll just concur with all of that, because that's pretty much what I was going to say in my own words. But yeah, I think it's very specific to the individuals that are in that relationship, and they have to sort of navigate that with one another, and it could look very different depending on, what that relationship is and who those people are. So
yeah, I think one problem we have as humans is wanting to concentrate on, let's get back to where we used to be, where we were at the beginning of our relationship, where we were all over each other. And it's like, it's okay with just like figuring out where you are and what your sex life looks like right now. And it can be completely different from where it was last week or 3 months ago or 3 years ago or 30 years ago. And that's fine. Like having the exact same intimacy level with your partner as it was in the good old days, or whatever you want to call it, and can be unhealthy if you're always striving for that, I think.
But you know what? I also think though I agree with that. But I also think too, Dale. I think that and again, this kind of I think the overarching thing with a lot of what we're going to talk about today are sort of the myths and stereotypes of how sex works. I also think in relationships there's peaks and valleys to sexual activity where you actually could get to a point where you go back to the good old days, not because you're trying to get there, but because other things happen and change. I think there's this idea that, oh, you know, when you're young, you fuck like rabbits, and then you get old and you get married and you have a job and you get fat, you get 40, and then you don't have sex or like whatever, and then like, you know, it ends, and then that's what it is. But, you know, depending on where, and I guess this is going to go to one of the other questions, but where people are emotionally, where people are mentally, where people are physically even, kind of like dictates a lot of times like to what degree that they're into having sex or not having sex. And that could mean peaks and valleys where it could be, you know, your own, you know, couple sexual revolution, like after maybe a period where there wasn't. I know, I don't want to speak for anyone, but my experience with friends of mine, for example, who have had children, you know, that is sort of a, it puts a quote-unquote kind of pause on the sexual... I won't call it an
literally,
obstacle.
if you don't want to have another kid, you literally have to pause on certain activities.
I was trying to be kind back. So I want to call it an obstacle. The kid's an obstacle, man. But I get what you. But all jokes aside, but yes, you know, for both physical, mental, and emotional reasons. It's just one example. I'm not saying it's the only one, but I mean, I think that we have this weird, in my opinion, idea about a lot of things when it comes to relationships and sexuality, in terms of like, this is the way, this is how it always works, and the minute you don't fit inside that confine, then you're doing it wrong, or something is wrong with you.
Right. And you know, it's interesting, 'cause I wouldn't say it's weird, but I would say, like, you know, bless the internet, right? The internet has allowed so many people to realize that their experiences aren't weird and aren't solitary. Aren't
solitary.
Yeah, aren't solitary.
Yeah.
Like you're not on your own if you don't want to have sex. It's like asexual being a thing is something that, like, some people in this world we live in might never even realize that, like, oh, there's more people like this if the information didn't get spread that way. But I also think, like, you know, sex is a need and also a luxury at the same time, right? And, you know, I think differentiating or acknowledging what those things are to you, and acknowledging, like, how you want to be engaged by them is, like, very important in a relationship, right? Because, like, for some people, if they're not having sex in their relationship, they feel less about their relationship. They might feel like unloved, or they might feel like unattractive, you know? So, like, it might be very important to them to have, like, a regular sort of amount of sex for over a span of time, right? But it's like, you know, once if you acknowledge what your fantasies are, because the fantasy of capturing something, the fantasy of getting what you want is the initial part of the attraction, right? Oh, I want this person wants me. I want to sleep with this person wants to sleep with me. But then once that's over, because you're actively sleeping with each other, what's the next fantasy? And are you even asking yourself that? And is your partner even asking yourself that? You know, like, what do you want? What turns you on? You know, people often say things like relationships are work, but never really talk about what the work is, you know? Like, sometimes you literally have to, like, sit down and stop with your partner, stare into each other's eyes, and, like, sort of, like, stoke those fires, and not necessarily get up and do the routines and the things that, like, keep you afloat. It's like sometimes you have to actively stop and make a plan. Like, we're going to go out and do this, and, you know, what do you want to do? Like, you know, and then do that, because that's going to keep your relationship alive.
But that's a good point. And, like, there are different reasons we want to have sex or we don't want to have sex. And one question that was posed by the audience is, like, is age a factor in that? I think especially for single folks who might be middle-aged or older, like, does age affect your libido? And is it harder to form a connection with people as you get older, an intimate connection in different ways?
So I'm actually going to utilize our individual that's done some study on this with what I'm going to say. So please, Kristen, help me and correct me if this is not so. I feel like, maybe specifically speaking about men, I think that there's issues around testosterone levels kind of being affected as age happens. So the ideas around sexual libido can, at least as I understand it, within men can be a challenge depending on health and some other genetic factors. But there are some things that do happen physiologically that I know, at least, or I believe I know, if I understood it, can or does happen oftentimes with men.
Yeah, it definitely can, and that's not to say that it does for everyone, right?
Right,
As we age, the ways that our hormones work can change. The ways that our body are working can change. The way that our health works can change, and all of those things can impact the ways in which we interact with our own sexuality. But just as much as that can happen, some folks as they age find that their libido increases. Right, as people are feeling more accustomed to the body they've been in for a certain amount of time, there's a freeing piece of that, right? I've been in this body now for 40, 50, 60 years. I know what my body is. I feel comfortable in this body. And that sort of gives you a bit of a freedom to say, like, now I can do with this body what I want to do with this body, as opposed to when you're a teenager or 20 and you're feeling like, I don't want somebody to look at me, like something's imperfect, whatever the case may be. And so there's sometimes a freedom in that, right? And so I think it's like a yes and, like it can be one or the other. There's an author, a sexuality author by the name of Joan Price, who does a lot of work around sexuality and aging. She wrote a book particularly called Naked at Our Age, that deals with folks who are like in their 60s and over, and kind of really details their stories, and they're really like all over the place in terms of where their libidos are, like have they decreased, have they not? And it's a really fun, kind of fascinating to read about, like, yeah, you know what, I feel more comfortable in my body now because I've been in it for so long. I know what my body does, and I know what pleasure is for me, and I know what I want and I need now. So I think it's definitely both of those things.
And yeah, I also think, also with the acknowledging about your fantasies and things like that, there's other factors that can be taken into consideration, like exercise. You know what I'm saying? Like exercise related to self-image, related to, as Kristen was saying, like being comfortable or being sort of like aware of your body and what your body likes. These things like increase or deflate your libido, and sex, as physical as it is very, very mental, like that. If you look at like even nocturnal emissions, right? Like that's all in your head, and it's still enough to stimulate your body to climax. So it's like, I think a lot of knowing yourself and honesty as you get older kind of adds to the appeal of sex. Like, I don't know if this team might, but like I feel like the sex that I've had later in life is so much better than the sex that I was having in my 20s. I was like, what was I doing back there? I always get embarrassed like thinking about it. Like that's what I thought sex was supposed to be, But as you get older and as you get, quote, however, I don't want to say better at it, but like better for you at it, it can become, I guess, more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, I'm really also thinking too, when you're talking about just like the mental aspects of sexuality, and this also kind of goes back to the last question we were talking about, but also really important to like remember how much our mentality and our emotions factor into sexuality. A lot of times when folks are like, oh, those first 6 months of a relationship were amazing, and then it was kind of meh after that. There's a reason for it. It's actually a biological driver. Right. So our hormones go nuts in the first 6 months of a relationship. Dopamine levels are off the charts. The parts of our brain that light up when basically you are using cocaine light up when you see your partner. In those first 6 months, you are literally addicted to that person. It's a biological driver saying like, I need to have this person. I need to be with them. It's when you like don't see anybody's flaws, right? Like nothing bothers you. You don't care that they snore. You don't care they leave their socks around.
Because you're high.
You are high as hell. You don't care, right? You don't care. Everything's great. Nothing's wrong. You don't care how they chew their food. You don't care, right? But after those 6 months, also,
that's how Mikal feels about me. It's like, I don't care how Dale chewed her food. Now, 5 years, 6 years in.
It is true.
Why
like
do you
after
eat
the
like
6
that?
months, like all of those hormones start to drop, and that's when you start moving into that intimate stage, right? Then you start moving into that stage of being like, oh, okay, so who am I with you as a person, as opposed to this biological need and this like this driver that's going on in my head, this mentality. So
Who
I think
is
that's
this
what
person?
yeah. Wait a minute, you snore? What the hell?
Right. Wait, you're gonna snore forever? Like,
No,
This
is
isn't
like
gonna wear off.
right? This isn't, you do this all the time?
but and also I will say another thing that I've realized in in life is going back to this idea of fantasy, right? Like everybody wants their fantasy fulfilled. Everybody wants to get the thing that they want, right? And an issue that I realized that has come up in multiple relationships I've had is if you guys are doing the same thing all the time, right? That gives you nothing to like admire in the other person. It gives you nothing to like, be interested in the other person. If you're already aware of everything they do. So like having your own life or having like something separate in your relationship that you can share with someone sort of passively, like not include them in, but like, hey, this is what happened at this other place that like doesn't have anything to do with you. Like it allows them to be interested in you. It allows them to have something to be like, oh, tell me about this, put me onto this. And it's it's a level of intimacy and interacting that I think it gets overlooked in relationships like a lot of times, but whenever I had partners who were doing their own thing off to the side, like it made me more attracted to them. I was like, oh, what are you doing over there? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like changing the world, really? Like,
No pressure.
I mean, you can change the world in a little way, but I'm saying it's just, yeah, but
Yeah, your partner's not, it's not like an extension of you, right? Like your partner is a whole other person. It's important to have those separate things, both for your own sanity, but also, yeah, to keep that relationship fresh.
Yeah. I was going to say, I feel like, back to what you kind of touched on for me, thinking about, I think that's one of the biggest challenges of being in a committed relationship for a period of time, because it is very easy to sort of like feel as if there's a set and forget, which can be dangerous, but hard to avoid. But I would say that, speaking from experience, and it's kind of the cliche to talk about, oh, you marry your best friend. But when you think about it, when you're in a friendship, you're constantly looking to see the best in that person, explore with that person, and genuinely excited and interested in whatever phase that they're in, if you're keeping that connection. And I think that, Dale kind of got at me because a long time ago, there's an old joke, but, I talked about, a good thing about being in a relationship is the mundaneness of it. And not to be so literal that it's boring, but like, for me, there's a comfort in like, I know you. I know what you're going to do. Right. I know the things that we do together. That's like, that's so
a kind of intimacy.
Right. It's a comfort to that, where it's like, what are they doing? Or like, why are they doing that? Or like, what's going on? I know for me, a lot of my intimacy very much is tied to like my emotional and mental state at any given point. Like things for me in terms of that ebb and flow. So if things are sort of kind of like not great for me in other realms, it's hard to feel the physical aspects of what we're talking about. And that happens. And that happens with time, especially if you're dealing with crisis or tragedy, if you're dealing with, just whatever you're dealing with, which usually are things that happen over periods of time. Those become the things that sort of like make it difficult or more of a challenge. So like, yeah, it's interesting. You do have to sort of find a way to work through those things. And oftentimes it is relying on the fact that, well, I know this person. I know the jokes that they like. Yeah. I know that movie that when we watch that movie, and there's I think there's a power in that. I think there's a safety in that. I think that's relationships that are kind of like deeply formed. Can kind of like utilize sometimes those things. So sometimes it is like, let's find a new fantasy. And you don't want to go back to the way it was, but sometimes it's like, well, you know what? I know that flower she likes, or I know that food he's into, or like when we go walking here, It's a thing, and those things
Right.
are really important. I think as you have relationships that kind of happen over time, because sometimes you do have to do a little bit of a reset.
And we do have to ask ourselves sometimes, what is love? And let's get into Nicole Oquendo with what is love?
What is love but a headache? Heartache, to be exact. We struggle to find happiness for someone else. We struggle to find happiness for someone else when we can't even find it in ourselves. Depression sinks in when your heart is left shattered on the ground. So I guess we can call love depressing. Stressing for attention like an addiction. Love addict. Sex addict. Can't live life correctly alone, need you by my side, addict. I'll kill myself if you ever leave me sitting on the sidewalk with no coat in the cold, addict. Love isn't supposed to be suicidal. Love isn't supposed to be me being afraid of living life without you. Love is supposed to be me. But the way my brain cells seem to work, I walk through life a little differently. Heart on my sleeve, bleeding black and white as I cut my chest open to give you all of me. But you get me. Placing your soul into my very own broken holes. I guess heaven does exist. Now I'm caught in the bliss of emotions as you dive deep in my ocean. Heaven sent. I feel God every time you enter me. So even when I have nothing left, I know our stars will align in the sky because your hands are where the tears from my eyes rest. I'm finally free. With my heart at ease, I'm finally me. With confidence, I can say your soul is where I forever plan to fall asleep. A part of me. Even in the moments I begin to lose my mind with thoughts of flying with the birds in the sky. Your soft whisper of hope gives me, your soft whisper of love gives me hope of life. The crazy thing is, all you had to do was smile my way. No words to say, just the power of God guiding us towards each other's pathways. I guess heaven does exist. Thank you.
All right, that was Nicole S.G. Oquendo with What is Love? And there she talks about a few different things like feeling addicted to love, like we were talking about earlier. She's talking about mental health and depression and how that is affected within relationships. It's a very vulnerable poem. But it got me thinking, and these, of course, are questions from our audience, because some of us are a little bit more introverted or maybe just insecure. So what are some easy ways to begin conversations around intimacy and sexuality?
With
I'm
who?
watching Mikhail's face, and he's like, "No, we're not."
I actually was just going to go to Mike to say, like, I want Kristen to answer because I'm going to take notes. I got nothing on this question. I want to hear Kristen's answer so I can take some notes.
I'm gonna let Baxter go first.
No, I don't. I just want to clarify. So it says, what are some ways to start the conversation about? Is it like with who? The conversation with as
With
a society?
anybody, maybe even yourself. Let's start with your partner. But I mean, some of us are lying to ourselves about what we like. Some of us are like, yes, I love missionary. And you really want to be, swinging from a sex swing. It's like, stop
Right.
lying to
You can be
yourself,
missionary
bro.
from a sex.
You started thinking about sex swing and you just got off topic.
No. I was just trying to rearrange what I was going to say. I think I think it starts with being honest with yourself, right? Like every conversation with someone else has to start as a conversation with yourself. And I think there's a lot to unpack when it comes to sex, and there's a lot to like for ourselves, right? Like we're given the concept of sex in a very specific and a very like Eurocentric, very heteronormative, very like old fashioned sort of way, and most of the adults that you would speak to today have a lot of unlearning to do, right? So even if you go to the kids today, it's like this is a whole new world for a lot of us, and there's a lot of questions that we have to like break apart for ourselves about how honest we are with ourselves about sex. Like one of the things that Mikhail, what you said on the last question that like made me think about it is like the pressure of identity to men in sex, or I'll say cis heterosexual men, because like that's my experience. But the pressure that sex has is like something that I don't think is spoken about a lot, like in general. Like for men, your sexual prowess is your identity, and it's almost more important than anything else. Like if it was discovered that Elon Musk had like a small penis or had erectile dysfunction, it would almost invalidate all of his success up until that point for a lot of like men in society, and that's crazy, right?
That is
That's
all facts, but I hate to put it in ear. I think that also is with many hetero women as well.
no, but I feel like the pressure of sex on women is something that's more talked about and more like obvious and aware. Like we know that society puts a pressure of sex on women. What I'm saying is like, you know, the pressure for a man to appear dominant or to appear virile or like how much his identity is attached to his sexual performance is it's insane, and I don't think there's a lot of conversation about how like warped that is. Like think about it, when you were a virgin and you had to like have sex, it was almost like I gotta get rid of my virginity, I gotta do it, because if I don't do it I'm less valuable. Like if I'm the last of my friends to have sex, I'm like less valuable than they are, you know. If I'm not good at sex, I'm less valuable. If I can't get women, I'm less valuable. And it's like there's so much of our personality that's like tied to it that it's insane. And I think maybe I've lost the point of the novel.
I mean, we've kind of pivoted a little bit. I did want to say before we continue on, or before everyone else answers, is that like I think there's also like this stereotype that women aren't supposed to enjoy sex, like ever, even with a partner.
Definitely.
Like you're told losing your virginity will hurt. So if losing your virginity doesn't hurt and you don't bleed, like
right,
you're seen as a weirdo, or like that's like, but that you're supposed to, you know, or like this, there's, you see it in sitcoms, you see it in movies, this over normalization of women trying to get out of having sex with their partner, as if
right,
never be
not tonight,
the hypersexual one. Yeah, like I have a headache. Like that's not true for all women. Sometimes the woman is the one who always wants to have sex, and the man is like, I'm just pretending to have sex, to want to have sex because you want to have sex. I actually saw it. I was watching one of my favorite sitcoms, which was really old and only ran for 3 seasons, and I am actually looking back pissed off about that, Half and Half. And there's an episode about that, how they were pretending to want to have sex because they felt like they were freshly in love. And they actually had that conversation. I was like, this show is amazing. And that was the last season of the show.
I mean, I think it really does actually go back to the question, though. I mean, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. There is so much toxicity and weaponization around sexuality. And I will say, like, in our culture, like Western, like colonized, like society here, like other societies don't have as much as I think we do. But we put these very specific roles on people of what they have to play out in sexuality. And then we tell people that they need to know how to do sex and they need to know how to do relationships, but we're not going to teach you how to do it. Like, that's insanity. We don't tell people how to go drive a car, but we're not going to teach you how to do it. We don't tell people to go do calculus, but we're not going to teach you how to do it. Right. But yeah, go and have an intimate relationship that can fuck up your life, but we're not going to teach you how to do it. Like, are you
right? So then we end up learning in relationships and like fucking shit up.
Right. And like that's your literal life. Like I can go do calculus, like that's fine. That's a thing that I don't have to worry about. But like sex and sexuality and relationships have very real world consequences. And I think to Baxter's point, like there's so much toxicity wrapped up in that, and like the roles that we assign to people, and we put them in that box and they're not allowed to like be outside of that, right? It's a very confining piece. But I think to get to the point of like the conversation and how to do that, I think the conversation that you have with a partner is still the same conversation you have with yourself, right? It begins with figuring out what your wants and your needs and desires are. And you need to do that separate from what people are telling you what your wants and needs and desires are. And that's a really important piece of that, like separate from what everybody else is telling you you should be wanting or what you should be doing or what sex looks like. There's a tool that I use with a lot of folks that I work with called a yes, no, maybe list. You can find one from Autostraddle that I like a lot, but you can find a whole bunch of different ones. It comes out of really like kink community, but you can make them however you want. And essentially, like you just make a list of all of these different types of like sexual things that you might want to do, and then you do a yes, no, maybe. Yes, I want to do it. No, I don't. Maybe I might be into it. I need more information. Do one for yourself and see where you're at, and then do one with a partner and see where they're at, and then like have a conversation. You know, have the conversation, but begin by being honest and open with each other. Like, you haven't been taught how to do this. You shouldn't know how to do this. And it's going to be an awkward conversation, and acknowledging that. Like, we don't teach people how to do this.
Right. And then it's like, it's a crapshoot, right? It's like, hopefully you'll find a partner who's like slightly more knowledgeable than you, and they'll teach you something, and then you can teach your partner, like, you know. But it's like, if you like, there's so many people who, like, because just the luck of the draw, like the partners they've had or the sexual experiences that they've had are so unfulfilled in sex, just because they've never had an experience to kind of like show them stuff that they like, you know, people put people make light of missionary, right? Some people love missionary, but some people only know missionary because that's the only sex that they've ever had.
Yeah. Well, you know, and you gave a great example, Chris, and I actually know that list because of you when you mentioned it. But the question I want to ask you specifically is, so a lot of things we're talking about is like, how do you have that conversation if you or both of you, and I'm speaking specifically if it's an intimate partner, not necessarily like a friend or something like that, has issues of shame or rejection, or within the conversation, certain biases around things come. How do you, that's what I'm curious to hear from you about. Like, how do you, what in your opinion, like, is ways to sort of like navigate those things or enter into those things? Because I think that's one of the biggest reasons why the conversations become hard, just to name it. It's that we do kind of live in this world where the idea of sex has to be a very specific thing related to a specific body and a specific orientation. And the minute that goes a half an inch left or is outside of one of the partner's experience, it becomes a turnoff or a stop or a judgment, and then that conversation doesn't become, because there's an assumption, right? To like, oh, it's sex. We all want to talk about sex. Oh, we talk about sex. Let's talk about, yeah, I want. And that's not really how it happens for a lot of people in the real world. It's like, well, actually, I like to be covered in chocolate syrup and scream out chicken. And they're like, whoa, 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 chill. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Like, oh, I want to dress up in diapers and, you know, be called mom. Is whoa, 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 whoa. We can't talk about that. And it's sort of like, those are the types, and I'm using some kind of extreme maybe examples or whatever have you, or apologies, I don't want to make light of people's kinks because those are real kinks. But you know, something of that nature where it isn't just like, well, do you like to do missionary? Like, that seems to be more of a vanilla thing. I'm thinking of more things of like, if you had a bad experience and that's why you don't want to talk about a certain thing, or it's taboo, the type of thing you may want. Let's say it's like asphyxiation or something of that nature. Like, how do you enter into the conversations when those things are obvious possible things of like shame and regret or judgment? That I think that's what makes talking about these things difficult. Like, what would your opinion on like ways to deal with that?
I mean, it's hard, right? Like, these conversations are hard and they're always going to be hard. I think there needs to be trust. There needs to be trust between partners, that you know that this is a conversation that you're at least going to enter into respectfully. If you don't trust your partner to have a respectful conversation, then you really need to be thinking about if that's a relationship you want to be in the first place, right? But one of the things that I suggest to folks is think about when and where you're going to have the conversation. I think so frequently we think about having conversations about sex right before we're about to have sex, which is literally the worst time to have that conversation, right? Because you're like, hey, since we're here and naked, what do you think about this prop that I bought, right? Which is like not the time to bring it up, right? Because you're either going to feel coerced into saying, yes, you want to use it, or you're going to feel bad about telling somebody no. It's a really charged situation. So I encourage folks to like have sort of like when I first started training as a sex educator, something that we used to call like a sex date, which is not a date to have sex, but it's a date to talk about sex. And it's going to be separate from being in that charged situation. Like, you go and have coffee, or like right now it's like going on Zoom or whatever. And it's a time that you're going to set aside and be like, listen, this is the time that we're going to have this conversation, right? And enter into it and be really honest around what has happened in the past, saying like, listen, these are the things that I'd like to talk about. These are not necessarily things that I'm expecting you to do right now, but here's some of the things that I'm interested in how do you feel about them? What are some of the things that we can do together, right? Not everybody's kink, not everybody's sexuality is going to match up on every single piece, and that's just the way we are as humans. But really entering it into it with good faith, I think is the first piece of that. And also understanding that, again, these are conversations that are hard for folks, and giving everybody the grace to fail in the conversation and to continue to pick it back up again. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, it totally did. No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Totally did.
So, in your experience, how do you achieve a healthy sexual life, a healthy sex life during a very stressful season in your life? Especially with a long-term partner.
This question assumes that we have achieved a healthy sex life.
It does.
Or has a long-term partner.
Or you have one going
on. Or
a
long-term partner, right.
Yeah, like I'm saying, this feels personal. Like, yeah, it's like, in your experience, well, what if you don't have that experience? Right. I mean, I guess we can speak to our own, but that seems a little...
In your experience, what is a healthy sex life? And how do you get that? It's extremely helpful for our audience if you have that experience with a long-term partner. How about that?
I'll admit that I am still trying to define what a healthy sex life is for myself. You know, I've realized that I have a very dire relationship with sex in my life, but that might not match with like, not as a need for emotional intimacy, but just as a need for like the physical act of sex. And like, I've sort of been looking into whether I think it's healthy or not, because like having a large appetite for sex could be healthy, could not be healthy. I guess it's whether or not it hinders you from your daily your routines or hinders you from like life, right? And I will say, like, I feel like my relationship with sex has benefited me at times in my life, but has also sort of been an obstruction to having maybe a better relationship than I could have with some of my partners. So it's a process. It starts with education. It starts with questioning yourself, and it starts with being honest. Honesty is the biggest key. Honesty with yourself and honesty with your partners. Mm-hmm. I think any healthy sex life is an honest one. I guess I'll put it that way.
Absolutely.
And one filled with consent. So that's actually the
conversation
for next month.
Definitely.
Yes. I think this is such a sort of like on point question, especially right now, right? Because of, everybody I think is going through a stressful point in time right now. Like just sort of globally, but, other folks are managing more sort of like localized stresses. I think the acknowledgement of what's going on, not just trying to like push it to the side and pretend like things aren't stressful and things aren't happening, I think is a really important point of that. The more that you try to ignore stress, the more you try to ignore a situation and not acknowledge it, the more it's actually going to intrude on your life. Because your brain's like, no, this is happening. Pay attention to me. And you're kind of like, please go away. So I think acknowledging what's happening and acknowledging that it's affecting you, and then figuring out ways to navigate around that, right? Acknowledging like, hey, I'm feeling stressful and I don't feel like having sex right now. I feel gross, right? Like I am depressed. I don't feel happy. I don't want to do this right now. So what are other ways that we can engage in intimacy that aren't the other ways we've been engaging, right? Like maybe I don't want to have like a physical sex with you. Maybe I just want to be intimate and holding hands on the couch. Maybe I just want to like play a board game with you. Maybe I just want to have a conversation, but like having that conversation be active about what's going on with the two of you or more of you.
I agree.
Maybe
completely.
I just want to slow dance.
Exactly. Yeah.
I concur. I don't really have much to add that would be different. It's jarring, the question for me, only from the standpoint of like my default is like answer personally, and I'm like, okay, how vulnerable am I going to be here? What am I saying on camera, as opposed to, but I don't want to give anybody general advice. I'm just like, everything's specific. So I think it's everything that Kristen said. It's about acknowledging where you are, and being honest with that, and then having that communication, which I think this time is difficult for anyone that's in a relationship. I mean, period. I mean, everyone, period. But like in particular, when you're kind of in a situation of close proximity, there's many relationships that we don't even hear about that are, even more fraught with danger because of the fact of the closeness and the proximity. We also know that there are relationships where people are experiencing the stress at different levels and for different reasons that impact them differently. And the normal, quote unquote, ways that there might have been to sort of mitigate those things or navigate those things aren't there, because now you don't have the freedom and the access to kind of be beyond your space, or even just to interact with other people that could be, help with that. Obviously not talking about like your side piece or something like that, but a friend or a relative, someone that you have a connection with that you can sort of confide in. So I think it's all that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Speaking of side pieces, and this isn't necessarily a side piece, but for those of us, or I should not say us, but for those people who are in open relationships and polyamory, how can they have open, healthy conversations around that and avoid the questions are right in front of me, guys. I don't know how I'm forgetting the words.
All right, you got this.
But how can they maintain security and trust within a polyamory situation or an open relationship, which can, of course, be different?
Honesty. Like, if you take away the boundary of like the physical sort of I'm looking for a very specific word. If you take away the physical sacredness of a relationship, like if being physical with someone else isn't a boundary in your relationship, right? The only thing you have left is honesty, right? If I'm not going to restrain you from being with other people in any other way, like you have to be honest, because the moment that you're not honest, you don't have any kind of a relationship. Like there's nothing there, So any polyamorous, any unmonogamous, I mean, it's true for any relationship, even monogamous, but it's almost like a dire situation. It's like you need to breathe in any situation, right? But when you're underwater, like your oxygen tank becomes like a little bit more serious. You know what I'm saying? So it's like when you're in a polyamorous situation, or if you're in a non-monogamous situation, like the level of honesty that you need to be with your partner is dire.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Communication, Google Calendars, both of those things. But yeah, absolutely. Like communication, making sure everyone is on the same page and actually wants to be in that type of relationship, right? Like sometimes folks are like, oh yeah, I want an open relationship. Do you, or does your partner want an open relationship?
Yeah.
That's not an open relationship. That's your partner wanting to be with somebody else and trying to make you okay with it. That's not, that's coercion. That's not an open relationship, right? So making sure that everybody's on the same page. What do you want from that open relationship? Knowing that if you're having a poly relationship or an open relationship, are you bringing somebody else into your relationship? What is that person's role going to be in that relationship? Because you are bringing somebody else in, right? Potentially, and that is a person that has their own emotions and feelings and experiences. That's not just like a hypothetical person, like that's a real person.
Yeah.
And what is their experience going to be with you in an established relationship? There's a really great book called the Jealousy Workbook that's specifically designed for folks who are navigating or thinking about poly or open relationships. It has a whole bunch of exercises that you can kind of work through with your partners to think about the ways in which you might be navigating different feelings of jealousy or security through poly relationships, how much you might want to share with your partner. Do you want to hear about them and their partner? Do you not?
Right.
Do you want to know their partner? Do you not? Is that person going to be part of your relationship or not? I think being really, as Baxter was saying, honest, communicate, because if you don't have those things, it's going to blow up in your face.
And just, I guess for clarity, polyamorous can be, you have like serious relationships outside of the main relationship, or it can just be like or it can be like a couple that has a relationship with another person or couple. An open relationship for many people means like you have maybe like one-off relationships, sexual relationships with other people. Just to That's kind of like my understanding. It doesn't have to be that. Of course, it's different for every relationship. But just so we can like blanket it for this conversation.
Yeah, no,
Generally, yeah.
it's important to have those terms defined.
Macau, do you have an opinion, or you're just like, I'm just gonna take notes?
I mean, I am always taking notes, but no, I mean, I think again, I don't really have much to add. It's just and all of this really can honestly, I don't want to reduce things, but everything we're talking about really could just be answered with communication and honesty. Like that's really the hallmark of all of it. That's what I think as well. I think that both people need to know the rules, the understandings, and agree on those things, and then be consistent in that.
And be prepared for the work, because a lot of people, I think, assume the best case scenario, right? Like when you're like, oh, we're going to be in an open relationship and we're going to be honest with each other, right? Like there's always going to be the human reality of it, right? Mm-hmm. Like something along the lines of like, just because, like, you might be honest, but the reaction that you get with your honesty might not be comfortable, or it might not even be reassuring or validating, right? Mm-hmm. And but like feelings are valid just because they're feelings. So it's like those are things to navigate. Like just because you're honest with someone doesn't mean that like they're going to take it in the way that you want them to take it. And then what happens next? Do you stop being honest with them? Do they change the way that they respond to it? Is the way they respond to it even negative or wrong? There's so much there's so many moving parts, and there's like we said in the other thing, like there's no one way of any of this. Like there's no one way for a monogamous relationship, so there's no one way for a polyamorous relationship. And it really has a lot to do with maintenance and the constant work that comes with communicating with your partner and finding out specifically what they're looking for and specifically like what you're looking for.
Maybe we shouldn't say work. Maybe we should say building.
Maintenance.
I don't know.
Building. Even maintenance kind of sounds bad. Like, who really wants to do maintenance?
You know,
but like,
I mean, maintenance is important.
We're all artistic people here. Kristen is
an
an
actress.
We've all heard
that's
the
not
term
maintained. It's not great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I gotta say, I was gonna add to something to Baxter, but I'm gonna have to fall on different sides. I like the idea of work. I know work has a negative connotation, because I was gonna say that every relationship requires work. It doesn't matter what type of relationship. Yeah. And to this point, which I really enjoy about this conversation, one of the things I don't want to go off on a complete soapbox rant, but I'm really tired in the new lexicon, especially in social justice, like doing the work. And yet no one identifies and speaks to or articulates the actual work. So it's learning how to communicate. It's developing a relationship internally with yourself. It's building, particular esteems. It is understanding and practicing honesty. It is learning communications.
Your boundaries.
Knowing your boundaries. Right. Being honest with yourself. Knowing when you're triggered and when you're not. You're not really coming from a good place yourself.
Right. Because knowing your boundaries and communicating those boundaries is such an important part that often gets like overlooked. And then what happens is your partner or you have to deal with a triggered partner, right? Like you do something or say something that you were never aware that what was their boundaries, and now they're responding in kind without ever having communicated that, which isn't a fault on anybody's part, but it's like it's a complex relationship situation.
Well, yeah, and all I was just going to just say is I appreciated this conversation, because when we're talking about these things, it's not just like, so you just got to work. It's like, well, no, this is the thing that these are some strategies that you can do, which is the work, which I think is important, because I think a lot of times, a lot of people are kind of left in the dark about that, and they hear that term and they're like, well, if you're going to make this, if this is going to be something that's going to be good for you, you have to do the work. It's like, all right, but I don't know I don't have job training.
That goes back to what Kristen was saying about like we expect people to be good at this thing without ever telling them like what is the work. You're absolutely right.
don't teach them. I mean, I think it's important. Relationship care is active, right? It's not a passive thing. We don't care. The same thing about like community care and self-care, right? These are not passive things. They're active things that we do. And, you know, to get to your point, Baxter, about the boundary piece, that's, you know, thinking about your boundaries and then reassessing them, right? Because they change and they can shift. And sometimes we don't realize that they've changed and shifted. And sometimes we hit a boundary that we didn't even know was there. And we're like, oh,
sometimes new boundaries. Yeah, right.
Right. I went right over it and I didn't even see it back there. Right. I passed go and did not collect $200. So like, you know, doing that active work of just being in constant communication with yourself, like where am I at? In constant communication with that other person. That is the work. That is the active piece of that. That's not something you get to like set and forget.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to Osiris Anthem and Mr. Loverman and see what he has to say about that.
Chevelle Franklin and Shabba Ranks. Who knows that song? Yeah. Somebody sing it. Shabba! Now when this song dropped, I was like 5. And my mother's husband, he was still alive, and he played songs like this, cruising in his ride. See, we lived in Flatbush, and that was just the vibe. All the West Indians living in Brooklyn had arrived in the land of the free, where opportunity was laid at our feet. Allegedly, I say alleged because this shit was still heavy. The only difference between Jamaica and here was street lights. The young bucks still carried on with street fights. Gunshots still rang out till deep night. And cops beat Rodney King up with peace pipes. See, that was street life in the places where this song played. The only relief was the words that this song said. That sweet loving underneath them sheets covered in the warmth of a something. And you know that she good because she laying with a brother man. No other man. Mr. Lover Man. And I love her, man. Piece of work sculpted by Da Vinci himself. Let me sit back and absorb your ether, from your voice to your features, from your thighs to your neck, from your toes to your iris, from your lips to your breast, from the nape of your neck to the curve of your cheek. Vertical lips vibrate on my tongue as I breathe. Inhale, exhale. What I taste is relief. Let's get it cracking. I'm Poseidon. You're my beast, like the Kraken. I'm inside it. I don't think bodies colliding. Then I drink. She licks, she sucks. I do too. I don't blink because my eyes are closed. See, I done picked the finest rose. And I hardly wear designer clothes, but I'm rocking her vagina, though, the promised land. With its raucous fans, you can feel the passion in the air, and this action that just ran. What actually is clear is that she is the finest in the land of the fair, and she won't get away from me. So Wednesday night, where we at? Sylvanas, and then we dining, and then we finding our way back to your place and start a wine to see your designers causing rises up inside me. It's no surprise that we tongue-tying, heavy sighing, legs dividing. I'm inside and close your eyes and I am prying and prodding. See, I'm a lion, you're my pride, and I am gliding, I am rising, because you are Zion. No, I am iron, but I am melting. With my trident, I'm Poseidon. I am writing, I am writing my name on your walls, and we are fighting. No, I am finding, I am deeper, I am deeper. I am driving, my stick shifts depriving her of all decency and me of all stress, because recently we've engaged in animalistic ways. I open you up like a book, read you and eat you, then panties get torn off like I did Hannibal Lecter's page. Hello, bloodies. My palm squeeze, and I spread that crack like Ronald Reagan. You are my crack, I can't feel my face. Nothing else matters. She's my past, present, and future. She's gifted. She passed me her present while listening to Future. And Rihanna playing love songs, but I'm far from gentle with that cake. Feel her body shake, shaking like a generator, body gyrate, rating like a dancehall queen, and she's letting out more wails than a Welsh prison. Break, and afterwards she tried to tell me it was fake. I love a sense of humor. I love the sense of you love. I touch the center. You bug and crush my entity. Your fucking is crazy. Your loving is superior, even though your demeanor is placid. And that's why even if you lived in Michigan, I'd march for that madness. Because see, our Karma Sutra is like that round of shooters, the way I try to fit you into 68 different brackets. And one, if you feel me. See, I climbed into her windows, downloaded my hard drive into her PC, and now no other brother can mac it. Ain't nothing can rot in that apple. See, she used to be bisexual, and now I got her rocking a members only jacket. Thank you, that's a members only. Thank you, so
Alright, that was Osiris Anthem with Mr. Loverman. I think his last line was kind of interesting, but you know, I thought it was interesting because I don't really believe you like switch teams. You just whatever you are, and like you like what you like, and it's okay if you're with
like Apple Jacks. We like.
I don't know, like, but you know, Osiris is definitely someone who has no problem communicating, or from what he's portraying to us, communicating about sexual activity, right? But that's not true for all activities or for all people. So one of the questions we got from the audience is, well, all these questions are from the audience, but why is there a stigma around men wanting their prostate stimulated? And is it a healthy desire for heterosexual men? Mikal has his finger raised.
Start this one, which was a very interesting juxtaposition because everything that Osiris was talking about in the piece was actually very like heteronormative, right? So we're talking about, and this is where I'm going to going to use my lifeline again, Kristen. Just if I'm wrong here, from a physiological perspective, what I learned and understood early on is that essentially one of the main G spots in the male anatomy is in the prostate. So actually stimulating that can actually create a much stronger orgasm in the time of intercourse. To that point, I think what may be stating the obvious, it's not considered something that is acceptable for hetero men because we have a stigmatism around any type of anal penetration or stimulation with hetero men as being homosexual. And there's a deep stigma around all of those things in terms of your masculinity, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it speaks to a lot of things we've been talking about today because, you know, there's these unwritten rules about what is acceptable and unacceptable in terms of sex. What women are allowed to do, what men are allowed to do, what type of act, you know, even we're thinking about things like fellatio, you know, well, that means if you do that, then you're dirty, or you're easy, or this or that, or if you're a missionary, you're boring, or if you do this, you're wild. Like, we have all of these categories that are very clear that we put things in terms of sex, which really don't, for a lot of people, don't really apply. And I think that's what's unfortunate because I think there are things around, to me, pleasure, the only barrier to pleasure is, and not barrier, I won't say barrier, but like, as long as there is consent given and earned, everything's in bounds and safety, right? So if I'm not going to kill you or you're not going to kill me because the act is that dangerous, like setting me on fire, you can use fire. I've used fire in sex, but not literally setting on fire.
I've never heard this. That might be something you wanted to create a boundary around. It's like, maybe I should tell my wife. That's
because that's very long ago, and it involved just candles and wax. That's all. That's why. But fire was involved. But the point being is, we don't have that type of relationship. A lot of people, many people, most people, I would argue, definitely in the Western world, with sex. Consent it's more than just consent. It's like consent and what is socially acceptable that I've learned or experienced. So I don't think a lot of heterosexual men have been introduced to, first, a good sex ed class, because I didn't know that until much later. And it was something that I learned. I almost want to say I knew that from experience, but then found out the actual thing. I think from maybe talking to you, Kristen, I think you sent me something on that. Where I was like, oh, that's why that feels good, because the G-spot's there. Mm-hmm. But that's not something that you're taught, especially specifically with men. It's not what you're taught. But I think the society also means that both men and women is like, oh, you wanted it in a butt? Oh, then you're not straight, you're gay. And that means a whole other stuff. And I think it's because we don't actually have a real healthy relationship around pleasure. Pleasure is stigmatized. It is politicized for both men and women, obviously to varying effects, degrees, and damaging. But we actually don't like pleasure.
I don't know if that's true. But
I'm being extreme, but I feel like because we put all of these constraints on it based on like what our norms are.
I feel like the relationship that we're indoctrinated into surrounding pleasure complicates it unnecessarily. You know, I agree with everything that you're saying, but it's just like, you know, speaking from personal experience, like I'm not in my sexual life, I don't engage with my prostate and like that. I know for a fact that it has to do with like sort of the effect of how vibrant homophobia was in my culture and my life growing up. Like anything to do with my butt in sex was just like, no, hell no. But it's a complex thing, right? Because like now the act of sex is extremely personal for each person. So like now I'm way more open about it, and I'm way more like educated, and I'm way more like, I've unlearned a lot, but I still have I have no fantasy or desire that has anything to do with playing with my prostate. So for me, it's like that's not necessarily where I want to go, even though I've like unlearned a lot, right? But what do I like? What happens if I meet a partner? Like, am I obligated to kind of like overcome my, you know what I'm saying?
I don't think you are. I think that's okay.
No, but yeah, like I'm talking like it's almost like the pendulum swinging the other way, right? Where it's like we were so led astray or skewed with what is a healthy sex life, but it's like you can still have your boundaries and you can still have your proximities, even if they're rooted in like maybe not the most healthiest thing, right? Like if a woman doesn't like to be choked, for whatever reason, she doesn't like to be choked, right? And it may get complex if you are with a partner who like that's their turn on, and then that's like a personal conversation to have in a relationship, which there might not be any reconciliation for it, like that might not be reconciled.
I would say this, Baxter. You said it earlier, and I think we all know this and agree this even before you said it. Probably the greatest sexual organ you have is your brain. And I say that to say this. I think that you exploring, like, well, why do I not want this stimulated? And understanding that it may be rooted in certain things that were learned homophobic, yeah. And yet understanding, like, that's something that I have to unlearn doesn't mean that you then now have to have, like, right. The desire to, right? So I would say it's definitely okay, but I think that type of processing that you've done, I don't know, I could be wrong, I don't know if that is the trajectory of a lot of heterosexual
it definitely
men.
Isn't, and that's like when we have conversations about racism and things like that, it's like the detriment is in the structure of ignorance, or the detriment is in the structure of shame, right? Like I don't find it shameful if a man, if that's his kink, right? So it's like I'm not gonna perpetuate this idea that that shouldn't be done. Or if I have like if I have children, if I have a son, I'm not gonna be like you don't let nobody play with your butt. Like it's like hey, I'm not gonna yuck your yum. Whatever you dig, like you got to explore that for yourself.
Right.
Yada yada yada. So that
if you want to, that's the clear thing.
Right.
If you want to.
Yeah. Right.
And I think that's the important piece, right? Like the if you want to piece, right? Like you can still unpack all that stuff and be like, yeah, actually, no, I still don't want to. But that's like the internal piece, like you don't want to. And I think both of you hit on a lot of these points. Like there's a lot of queer hostility around it. There's a lot of toxic masculinity around it. Baxter talked about this earlier, that we live in a society that doesn't want to allow cis het men to explore a lot of facets of their sexuality. And that plays out in what areas of their body they're allowed to find pleasure in, right? Like you're allowed to find pleasure in like your penis and that's it, right? Like it's there. And maybe you can think
right.
a little. Right?
Maybe
like,
your genitals. Maybe your genitals.
Right?
Maybe your genitals, depending on what it is.
Maybe. Think a little bit, but like here, right? So like the problem with that is that like when we make blanket statements that like X person can only be interested in like Y sex and Z way, like we limit ourselves tremendously and set ourselves up for like an array of negative outcomes, right? Like this is one of the ways that sexual violence happens. This is how sexual repression happens.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, this is how bad sex happens.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that everybody has to be open to everything, right? And nobody should be open to everything. You should be like thinking about what does it for me? What is pleasure to me? But don't close yourself off because somebody says like people like you don't do that. What do you mean people like you? There are no people like you. You're the only person like you. Nobody's attached to your body. You get to decide what is pleasure to you.
It's such a pervasive thing because like even if you're a man who does like your prostate stimulated, like if you're in a relationship with a very heterosexual but like in the sort of strict way woman, it might be hard to ask for that. It might be hard to like enter into that conversation where it's like, hey, I want you to put your finger or even the idea of like pegging or something like that, like that's looked at
more popular,
common.
at least in the media.
But the interesting thing, it's still looked at as submissive, and it's still looked at as almost homosexual. It's like a woman pegging a man is still looked at as homosexual when it's like the literal definition of like heterosexual is sex between a woman and a man. Like, you know what I'm saying?
And something you brought up, just you mentioned the word submissive, and I want to just touch on that really quick too. Like even that, like right, like the stigma idea of like submissive in a sexual sense being a negative, as opposed to that might be a way that someone experience a particular. And we think about
for men, for
women.
Specific.
I think sometimes when women hear, because we've been beaten down with religion so much, being a faux Abrahamic country, we're not, church and state are supposed to be separate, but are they? Kind of situation. We're kind of triggered by hearing this idea of submissive, and like being dominant in the bedroom is seen as empowering.
A virtue.
But some people like
a personality trait.
Yeah. Some people like being submissive in the bedroom, especially if they're dominating outside of.
But the interesting thing is, like, for women, I think the archetype of like the submissive woman and also the archetype of the dominatrix are both like widely popular, right? But for a man, the only submissive archetypes are sort of rooted in humiliation, right? Like the cuckold or you know, the simp or whatever. Like there's not a lot of like safe, comfortable ways that men could explore being submissive without it being attributed to a personality flaw. To, you know, it's like, oh, you let your woman, like even the idea of like your woman makes more money than you. It's like,
well, yeah, and that's patriarchy, right? That's the very definition of patriarchy, because the power dynamic always has to be, you know, no pun intended, but the man on top. That's how it's supposed to work.
What do you call it? Men are victims of patriarchy too.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But I think this conversation is also bringing up the really important point of like how we think about different identities too, right? Like if there's like this queer antagonism or this queer hostility, and we also have hostility towards, you know, submission for men, then what is that saying about how we're feeling about folks with those identities, right? Like the way in which, like, if we're thinking about submission as traditionally feminine, what does that mean about how we think about women? If we're thinking that, oh, that is gay, and I'm putting this in giant quotation marks, what does that mean about how we think about folks who are queer, right? And so really kind of bringing that to the forefront of like, what are we saying about that too?
And here it goes back again to the popular media and how we build society. Like when you see like, you know, queer sex, homosexuality in popular media, rarely do you see someone quote unquote having vanilla sex. It's like they're wild. It's leather. It's some type of kink. It's never like. But if you see like a heterosexual, you might see that, but you'll also see like, you know, the stereotypical romance novel. Like it's flowers and it's soft and it's tender and it's caressing.
Body's ripping.
To be honest with you, I think, and there's not too many moments in it because of it was an exploration of his queerness. But one of the reasons why Moonlight is one of the greatest movies I think I've ever seen is just the level of intimacy and the level of just like way in which there was like a sexual tension relationship between the main character and his long lost love, where it was just like, I mean, and it was so great how the director, because he's everything that you expect in an alpha male, lead drug dealer, mastered violence,
like push-ups every morning,
runs his block, got the car right, got the car chiseled, like all of the things that scream in our society, like alpha male. And really all he wanted to do was be caressed and like cuddled and held and like whispered to by this short order cook that was his like long lost love. And you don't get
by a light skinned dude.
They don't talk about it, right? They show it. And I think it's jarring because most people think like, well, if it's two dudes, you know, it's and it's, you know, they're pounding it out and it's, you know, it's all like aggro.
But who
it's like,
thinks
no,
that,
actually,
right? Like,
but I'm saying how we present it in like modern.
Yeah, but I mean, even like, you know, you've sparked this idea. Is like, because even like that's that's what we've seen. But like, the people who've lived those experiences, they have always known better. They have always known
For sure, for sure.
But then let's continue this. Like, so then who's telling these stories? Who's writing the story of this and that? And it's like when it's society. It's like when one group of people's problems is all of our problems. Like when queer people are allowed to tell the genuine truth of queer stories, then we'll be better educated on those things, and then we'll know, like, that it's not this thing that we've been shown. It's the same thing when men are allowed to tell, like, the full, when heterosexual men are allowed to tell the full breadth of the heterosexual experience. Everyone will be more educated. When women are allowed to tell, like, the full sort of, like, experience of being a woman, black woman, white women, queer women, then we'll all be better off for it. I think that's a large part of what we're missing is spaces where people can be vulnerable and honest about the actual experiences that they're having. Like Dale pointed out about women supposing to, like, not require sex or not want sex. If women had been telling these stories from the beginning, we would have known that, or not that we would have known that, I should say. Then society, it would have been more prevalent in society, is a better way of saying that.
There's a lot of talk about, like, what we're influenced, how sexuality is influenced by, like, the media, by who we see around us. I know in more recent years, it is like people are convinced that you can become gay or pan just by people even talking about it. Like, you automatically want to be gay as soon as you hear anyone talk about gayness in the room. It's just like all the children will now be gay because they had a gay teacher, right? But how do we know? Like, of course, there are other ways that we can be influenced by by our environment to want different things sexually, but how do we know when it is just our environment and not really something that we truly desire?
I think there's a flaw in that question. I think the flaw is assuming that the influence of our environment isn't as, like, genuine as, like we think, like, there's this innate feeling that's in us that springs forth out of no place, and, like, that's who we are. It's like, no, we are in our environments too. And, like, this idea that, like, introducing children or introducing young adults to, like, homosexuality or pansexuality might make them gay or might make them pansexual or whatever. Like, I think there is a validity to it, but hold on, like, the validity isn't the subversive, deceptive thing that, like, it's made out to be. It's just, if you allow people to know that there are more options or more opportunities or more, like, you could be so much more in life than, like, the binary. Like, you don't have to be just this or that. Then they will explore those options more, and then, yes, more people might come into the realization that they're not heterosexual, or they're not monogamous. If pansexuality or polyamory is made more of a common thing, then yeah, more people will explore that, and then it'll obviously end up in more people in these kinds of relationships. But the real question is, like, is that a negative? And I think the obvious answer is that it's not. Like, if more people live whatever truth that is that they find, then the happier they'll be. And happy people, I think, is always a positive.
Yeah, I think I read this question to the negative or a more pessimistic view of it, because I looked at it as, like, and not to the misunderstanding that you can, there's an agenda that, if I see a moonlight, suddenly I'm going to want to be gay. I was probably I probably was gay before that. The movie wasn't the reason why I became gay, or I don't, whatever it is. But I do think that, going back to the ideas of, like, shame and repression, I think are definitely influences from outside forces, be it your family and certain traditions, values, to what we see as socially acceptable. So I think that, for me, when I read that question, I read that to be that, yeah, like, we're not really given the space or the safety to simply just actually think about what is sexually good or right for us, because we have so many things constantly telling us what is right sexually and what is wrong sexually. And it's really hard, I think, to break through those lines, because we don't really, sex is a very taboo subject. It's a very like naughty thing. We don't talk about it, or we don't want people to know that like secretly I like to dress up in a bunny suit, or you know, whatever it is. So we don't actually just look at sex as like, oh, I'm gonna talk about the weather, or I'm gonna talk about my favorite wine, or I'm gonna talk about that painting behind Kristen's, you know, on her wall. Like that to me should be the level of comfort someone, an ideal world would be having about sex. Because if we're talking about consent and we're talking about pleasure, then there really shouldn't be anything around that. But we've built so many walls and obstacles and fears around it that I think absolutely it affects, you know, what we want to, you know, experience, or what we repress, because we're like, well, if I say that I actually like men and I like women too, there's going to be a label put on me, or I'm going to not get access to something, or I'm going to be singled out, or I might be put in harm's way. So I'm not going to talk about this. So I think that when I read that question, I was looking at it from that angle, because I feel like it's in going back again with a lot of the young people that I've had the fortune to work with, you know, that's a lot of the reasons why they don't say certain things. And even to the more like benign, like not even just talking about like if they're coming out as queer, but maybe things that they like to do or want to do that they don't want to. It's like, I don't want to be considered a slut because I want to actually do this. It's like, that's because they've been shown and told in their peer groups and media that, hey, if I like to enjoy this thing that, oh, by the way, it's kind of designed to be enjoyed,
right,
I'm not going to, you know what I'm saying? It's like
it's a personality flaw.
Yeah, it's like sex kind of is built to be fun. I think
it should be
designed. You know what I mean? It's like it's. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. So from that standpoint, you know, once we get the clearance of like we're all good to do it, then it's supposed to be like why wouldn't you talk about like eating your favorite ice cream or like whatever your favorite book is? But we don't look at it that way. It's just like, well, wait a minute. Are you married?
Like even like
are you
even
in
like
a relationship? Are you a man or are you a woman? Are you doing stuff that a straight man's supposed to be doing or not? Or
even like what Kristen said about the conversation about sex and how it's usually put off until like the last possible minute. And it's like, why isn't that more of a common conversation in courting, you know, like well before like, you know, you're in each other's houses or whatever.
Right. I mean, we are still also so influenced by sort of this like Puritan, like founding fathers' vision of this country that it still is so permeated into the idea of sex and gender and what we can talk about and who can talk about it. And I think I read the question in sort of the same way that Mikal did, just thinking about the ways in which like society and the communities that we grow up in might make folks, you know, hide certain parts of themselves or feel like they have to conform because they're afraid that they're going to be ostracized or they're actually going to be put in harm's way. They're going to experience violence. You know, I think about Alabama just this past week passed a law that is going to deny trans-affirming healthcare to young people. So in Alabama now, if young people are identifying as trans, that's not safe for them, right? And so does that mean that there's going to be less trans people in Alabama? No, it means that there's going to be less folks that are going to be out about being trans because it's not safe for them. And so I think in that way, it can influence the ways in which we express our gender or express our sexuality. It can make us feel as if we want to maybe change it. But I think also outside forces and communities on the opposite way can also help us shift and change it. So back to Baxter's point, I think when we have the words and when we have the example that can show us, oh, like that's what I am, that's what I feel, that's the word for it, then we all of a sudden have this like broader world opened up for us. You know, so many folks that I talk to have figured out how they identify their identity piece by being in communities on Reddit. You know, they come from like a small Midwestern town, like they don't know a whole ton of people. They get on Reddit, they get on a community and they're like, I didn't know asexuality was a thing.
Thank God
I didn't know aromanticism was a thing. I didn't know non-binary was a thing. And now all of a sudden, like I have a word for what I feel and who I am. did that influence who they were? No, not necessarily, but now they have like a name for it and they can be like, this is who and what I am. So I think in that way it can, but like, is listening to Montero gonna make you gay? No, it's not, right? Like, no.
It might make you horny. It won't make
Yeah,
you.
I mean, Lil Nas X is amazing. I don't think he has that power though. You can do a lot of things. I don't think it's that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You bring, yeah, it's funny you bring up that point. I think that's the weird. I think it's the weird thing that people don't realize about modern society, and specifically like social media. And you talked about it earlier, Baxter, and this idea, like, because in actuality we've been so isolated, it's been very easy to sort of like cluster ourselves in small groups, smaller than we realize. You know, there are, you know, I don't want to say hateful people, but we'll say conspiracy theorists
or closed-minded folk.
Or closed-minded folk. But you know, a lot of times closed-minded is because of the lack of experience. And now it's sort of like, I know there's a lot of orientations that I had not heard of, including things like pan and asexual, until I worked with teens at Urban Word, because they were bringing those terms to me, and I had to start looking stuff up. I'm like, wait,
God bless the kids.
What's that? And what was amazing is like super articulate, super read on it, and like they're like breaking. They're like, so this is, I'm pansexual, and that is this, and this.
Thank God for the internet.
And I was just like, okay,
these little kids are on there talking with each other.
Yeah.
You know, and it's because they're having these communications with one another. But I will say this:
hopefully, one another, and not older people who are
right,
like posing and trying to groom.
Yeah, that's a whole other question.
But I'll be honest.
No, a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Urban Word was an exception and privileged space because they were having those conversations almost exclusively within the confines of that spoken word community. So they weren't having that with their high school friends in their high schools, and if they were having it with those high school friends, those were private, you know, quote unquote closeted conversations that was not a part of their like the larger friend group. So they were finding the safety in this space that I happen to be privy to.
And it also, like, there's a certain level of learning that comes with teaching, right? So it's like, you know, them learning that stuff and being able to come and like hip you to it is part of, like, you know, their learning of the thing themselves. You know, they're being able to repeat this knowledge, because a lot of times the young adults learn, like, you can't really talk to your parents about it, or don't feel like you can talk to your parents about it. So having people that you can say these things back to is part of the learning as well. And, you know, it's also, indoctrination is such a, it's like, I think indoctrination is an underrated tool, like, you know, because some of the things that we get indoctrinated into that we believe is like completely normal, is, when you really think about it, is outrageous. Like marriage, no offense guys, but like the idea of marriage is insanity. You know what I'm saying? Especially when it's like two kids who get out of high school, like, you know, you get married and you get, like, you are 17 years old, you know what I'm saying? 5 years ago you weren't picking out your own clothes, and now you have attached yourself to this human being for the rest of your life, you know. And it's but like, we don't think twice of it, you know. We don't think twice about marriage. We don't think twice about I mean, I want to keep in the wheelhouse. I was going to say credit scores, but even that's like outrageous, like insane idea that once you get indoctrinated into, you're like, oh yeah, everyone has a credit score. Everyone has a social security number. Everyone has, like, you know, this. It's like, yo, how much of this is something that makes sense, like realistically, or how much of this is something that we were told is the way things are, you know? Because even like polyamory, you know, there's a part of polyamory makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense that you can have multiple loving relationships with more than one person. Like, why is that a far-fetched idea? Like, there's 8 million people, you know, billion, like 8 billion people. There's billions of people on this planet, billions of people. Like, you know, soulmate, the chance of you finding your soulmate and that this soulmate happened to live in the same city, on the same block, or worked at the same, you know, what do you
or
think? Or
wants to move to whatever block you live on, you know, you might, like, find them across the world, and then so they're just supposed to go back with you.
But even beyond that, it's like people like, oh yeah, we work together at an Olive Garden. It's like you think that your soulmate, out of every person that exists on this planet, just happened to be working at the same restaurant as you, and you think like that's the only person you're ever supposed to have intimacy with, physical or otherwise. Like that's an outrageous concept. What makes more sense is like, hey, you're going to have a multifaceted, nuanced life. And throughout that life, you're going to have multiple relationships that are going to be impactful and important to you in varying ways. That makes way more sense. Like, you know what I'm saying? You will have many loves. Some will be more important than others. Some will be with you for the rest of your life. That makes so much sense to me. This idea that like you're going to meet this one person and it's them until one of you die. And then the other one might be able to pick up the pieces, but people are going to talk. Like, you know?
Yeah. I feel like, and yeah, again, so much of my work is thinking about the ways in which like sexuality has been wielded in harmful ways, and how do we sort of recover from that? And I think about a lot about the idea of control and how do we use these concepts of indoctrination for control, right? So if we only have like the idea of a gender binary, if we only have the idea that men can have sex in this way and women can have sex in that way, if we only have the idea that sex is one certain thing, if we only have the idea that marriage is one certain thing, like it's very, very easy to control a narrative around that. And if you're outside of that, you're subversive and like you get put over there, right? If we allow folks to self-actualize, all of a sudden, like you're way out, right? And it's harder to control that narrative. Yeah. And I think piece of that is like when people are like, oh, well, you know, your environment is able to like influence and change how you think about your sexuality. No, that's people self-actualizing, and that's scary as hell to some people, right? So like so much I think of sexuality and relationship is just figuring out how to self-actualize in the body and space that you're in, you know?
Feel comfortable with that and celebrate it.
Right. Even the term queer, like it literally means like other, you know, or different.
Yeah.
You know?
But also thinking about like the reclamation of that word, right? For how long is it used as a derogatory term when the community was like, no, this is ours now. You know?
Right.
Yes. All things to think over. Wonderful commentary from all of y'all. Thank you so much. We're going to get into our last video. This is Tatiana Owens with Can't Lose / Kiss. Okay. And so that was Tatiana Owens with Can't Lose /Kiss. So Kiss is one of my favorite songs. Prince is one of my favorite artists. I'm convinced he's the Sorcerer Supreme and is living in another realm and is not actually passed on.
Prince would make an amazing Sorcerer Supreme.
He would be. So I want to thank y'all all again for being on the panel, being on the Poet Podcast with me today and talking about all these issues. All these questions were posed from the audience. And I hope y'all got something out of it. I got something out of it. But just final thoughts for the people, for yourselves, for us. What would you like to offer?
I just want to thank Krista for being here. It's always a joy and a pleasure to hang out and talk. And yeah, this was a really great. Similar to the police brutality one, this one could be like a part 2 or a part 3 for sure.
Two things. I'll leave the people with. One thing is something I say all the time, and the other thing is something that I've learned. The first thing, what I say all the time, is it's not a question if you can't say no. And whenever somebody comes at you with something and they ask you for whatever, if no is not an option, they're not asking you. Use that wherever you can in life. And the second thing is something I heard. I forgot the man who the quote comes from, but the quote is, life is something that happens once forever.
I love that. Yeah, Dale, I'm just was really excited that you asked me to do this. I think the more spaces that we open up to have these conversations, the better, because we just don't have them enough and more accessibly enough for folks. So I really enjoyed being able to talk with you and Baxter and Mikal. So thank you so much for having me.
I agree.
Well, thank y'all, everyone. Once again, yes, I echo what everyone has said. Like, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for all of your thoughts. Thank you for entertaining my questions and my not being able to pronounce words that are right in front of me for some reason.
It's still in the middle of a pandemic. It's the end of the world. It's fine.
That's true too. So once again, this is the Poet Podcast with Dale Novella. Thank you once again, everyone, for listening, and we will see you next time.